intimately close together and have this opportunity to interact. I particularly wanted to say hello to the seniors who are at Highlands House. My late father-in-law, Charles Kluk, was at Highlands House for a few years until he passed away, and we were frequent visitors. And I must say, we loved Highlands House. That he was so well cared for, and he was happy there. So it's got very fond memories for me. And as has Cape Town in general. Cape Town community has always been a bit like home. All three of our children, I grew up in Durban. I was born in Durban. And our three children were all born there. And after school, there's very little Jewish life for young people. So the kids all went off to UCT, to university, which, as you all know, is a magnificent university. And it was a whole new journey for us to discover Cape Town, and our children were embraced by Cape Townians. And so it feels a little bit like home. Our eldest daughter has remained in Cape Town, married, and has two little boys. And so now we have grandchildren in the school system. So we feel like honorary Cape Townians. So thank you so much for always making us feel welcome. And it's lovely to be here with all of you. And I'm going to just give you a couple of words of introduction as to what the work that I'm involved in, and then also tell you a little bit about what I had planned to talk about this morning. But when I say talk about, with the view to all of you being able to ask questions and interact with me and learn more from hopefully from what I have to share. So I am the president of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, the national board, and I also have a role as the director of the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Center. So just the same as your Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center, we have one in Durban, which we started in 2008. And so that's where I work every day. And in terms of the board, I spend time in Johannesburg, although not for the last 15 months. We do it all on Zoom. And I just wanted to share a little bit at this time about the work of the board in this hostile environment when events in Israel impact the local Jewish community. So I'm sure all of us are acutely aware of the difficult situation in Israel at the moment. And regrettably, the conflict, whenever there is conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, the diaspora Jewish community are deeply affected. But somehow this time, it seems to be almost worse. And we've done a lot of analysis, but it's mostly due to social media and the technology that we've just been praising and saying how it's provided us with this amazing platform to get together. That technology has a flip side where young people are able to communicate with one another on social media and sadly spew a lot of hatred, mostly in the direction of anti-Semitism. So whatever your views on the conflict, when it spills over and impacts local Jews, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies needs to intervene. And over the past 10 days, shockwaves pretty much have been felt throughout the world, in the Jewish world, and possibly the worst instance, I'm not sure if many of you were aware of an incident in the UK where a cavalcade of pro-Palestinian cars drove through Jewish areas calling for Jewish women to be raped. It's not just us here in the southern tip of Africa that are seeing a very worrying rise in anti-Semitism, but it's global. And so we at the SAJBD, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, have been working round the clock, but literally, to engage at all levels of government and civil society to ensure that the Jewish community in our country continue to feel safe and that we feel like we belong in South Africa. And I'll give you specific incidents and our responses to those incidents now as we talk. But before I tell you a little bit about the incidents that we've had in this context and the responses that we've provided, it's important for you to understand the work that we do overall as a board and what our role is. So going back to just over a year ago and the start of COVID, I'll just give you a little bit of the work that we've been doing. we created a committee bringing all Jewish institutions together to ensure that all the schools, the social welfare, the retirement homes, the religious community all came together to make sure that we responded to this pandemic in a way that would be supportive of our community. So whether the schools should close, we engaged with the scientific community, and I'm sure you're aware that the top scientists in South Africa who are making decisions on behalf of all South Africans and advising the president happen to be Jewish. So Professor Barry Shube and his team have been unbelievable in providing support to the community, advising about when we should be closing schools, when we should be in lockdowns, who should be doing what in order to make sure that our community is as protected as we can be. Fundraising for those in dire need due to lockdown. We partnered with the Angel Network across South Africa to provide literally millions to people in our country who had absolutely nothing. And we found themselves in a situation where they couldn't go to work. They didn't have the security and social security of being able to earn UIF or anything. So we've been proactive in terms of outreach, which our community is renowned for. We've been involved in supporting people with mental health challenges. We've provided and worked closely with the Chevra Kadisha nationally to support a business loan scheme. And we've been fighting anti-Semitism, which is our core mandate. And sadly, through this pandemic, anti-Semitism has been on the rise. And it's obviously been impacted now even more by the challenges with the conflict in Israel and Gaza. But towards the end of last year, there was a real sort of chink of light that started to appear in the Middle East with the Abrahamic Accords. And we really thought that this was going to be a springboard for further peace and coexistence in the Middle East. But as we know, the conflict began 10 days ago, and things have been really tough for us since then. The social media platforms, so when I say social media, I mean Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, have been enormously hostile with images, and I thought of putting them on the screen to show you, and I just thought it's actually far too depressing. I'm sure you've seen some of them, but it's easy now for youngsters, and anybody with a smartphone can pick up a phone, and with the press of their thumb, they can become a journalist. They can spew the most vicious hatred, often under a pseudonym, but not even acknowledging their true identity. So it's really difficult to actually pinpoint who these perpetrators are. People will create a fake identity and say what they like. And we've been at the receiving end as a community of very, very unfortunate anti-Semitism. So we don't typically as a board get involved in Israeli issues, but we do when it impacts the community as it is now. So the Zionist Federation are traditionally the organization that take care of our Zionist requirements and keeping our community connected to the state of Israel. But in the case of this current conflict, we see how this hatred of Israel and demonization of Israel impacts us as a Jewish community, and that's when we step in. So we're involved with the media. We've done hundreds of media interviews and articles and responded. I don't know if many of you saw the letter that our president put out to fellow South Africans, damning Israel and laying the blame entirely at the feet of the Israelis, rather than understanding the complexities of that conflict and how difficult it is, and how South Africa, with our magnificent past transition to democracy, can and should be playing a role in bringing about a peaceful resolution to this conflict. So it's really unfortunate that we haven't been able to get South African government on board to bring about and to do what they can to use their expertise in terms of negotiating to bring about a peaceful settlement and a two-state solution in what we believe is a very tragic conflict that can be resolved if South African situation can be resolved. So it's not the first time we've been in this situation. In 2014, in 2009, in previous conflicts, we've been there. But as I say, with the social media platform at the moment being as prolific and as ubiquitous as it is, it's been much more demanding on us to be able to respond. So the strain that's taken by the diaspora has even been recognized in Israel. And the fact that we're not in bomb shelters, but we are taking an enormous flack and enormous pressure as we stand together with Israel. And I'll give you a couple of examples just to illustrate the point. The ANC put out a damning statement that were honestly vicious about always making the analogy with apartheid, and how we as South Africans know exactly what it feels like to be in a situation where we've been forcibly removed from our homes. And for all of us who know the truth about Israel, you can say a lot about Israel, but apartheid isn't one of them. The complex situation is not to be reduced to the clip that this is an apartheid state. This is a complex neighborhood, and the Israeli situation needs to be negotiated by the people who live there. And what we at the board really object to is that what happens in this conflict impacts us and fellow South Africans in South Africa. So it pits us against those who are in support supposedly of the Palestinian state, but in fact largely are anti-Israel's existence at all. So lots of protests on our streets. And in fact, this now Sunday coming, a protest is planned outside the offices of the South African Zionist Federation and the South African Jewish Board of Deputies in Johannesburg, in Glen Hazel. So they're coming into our neighborhood, which is actually a residential neighborhood where the offices are located, and are going to be protesting on a Sunday, which is really difficult and a difficult dilemma for our community. Should we sit back and not respond and hope that it's not too many people and that it goes away? Or should we, as many in our community in Johannesburg want to, should we hold a pro-Israel rally in support of Israel at the same time? Will that create tension between South Africans with different allegiances? Is it wise? These are all the dilemmas that we're grappling with literally at the moment. There are people who feel very passionately in our community who we need to provide an outlet for as well. We can't allow volatility to spill out and for our community to be found in a compromised position. So it's managing so many of these really tricky situations. But as a community, don't we have a right to also support our fellow Jews in Israel who are living through a really difficult time as well? So it's protecting those rights that the board works tirelessly. There's an enormous amount of bias in the radio and in the press. And one particular example is Radio 702 and Cape Talk, where they've had a number of very hostile speakers, from academics to activists, speaking in radio shows without giving the opposing view at all. And we've asked, and the radio station 702 Cape Talk pride themselves in being a radio station that provides a space to talk, but they've not given us any opportunity to offer an opposing view. So now we are confronting the opportunity of what should we do about that? Should we let our community know how disappointed we are that we've tried and tried and tried, and then today we've been given a slot this morning on 7:02 and they cancelled and said, oh, maybe on Monday. So we are working, as I say, looking at what's the legal alternative? What are our rights? Should we, go to the ombudsman? All of these challenges as a community wrestle with us every single day. Responding to the president's letter is something that we're going to be doing in the coming hours, because every single challenge that we are confronting needs to be responded to. Our community need to understand that we are frontline and center, negotiating, meeting with senior political and diplomatic advisors at the highest level to bring our case, that we don't want to import this conflict onto our streets. We are fellow South Africans, and we don't want to create any further animosity between South Africans than is absolutely necessary. And this conflict on another continent should not be a source of division between South Africans, and certainly not something that is expressed so vehemently and so filled with so much hatred. Another example that I found deeply regrettable is schools. That actually there are schools now where school children, again, back to the social media, there are WhatsApp groups that schools have. And so there's a class WhatsApp group, there are kids in WhatsApp groups that are at school. Jewish children, as young as grade 5 and grade 6, are being subjected to hideous allegations and demonization of Israel by their seemingly friends from 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we are now, in particular, I'll mention the school in Johannesburg, the Red Hill School, which is a prestigious private school, have been in the public domain and in the media for exactly this. They've had awful rhetoric between the learners themselves. So that the principal, who happens to be Jewish, wrote a letter to the Red Hill community saying that they should leave their prejudices at the gate of the school and they shouldn't be engaging in any of these topics at school, which received a huge backlash. So much so that the Palestinian Solidarity Commission saying that the school is stifling debate and stifling learners from the opportunity to engage. And as a result, they are going to have a protest outside the school to show everybody that this school stifles debate and is in counter to what are the principles of good education. So this morning, there was a protest outside Red Hill School. There weren't thousands of people, but there weren't a few. There were a good number. I've seen a couple of videos, a good number of people chanting, free, free Palestine, Palestine from the river to the sea, free, free. It's not a nice environment for young people to be able to arrive at school and to be confronted with this kind of protest. Is tough. So we've been engaging with the school, we're engaging with parents, we are supporting the Jewish parents, but it's a fraction. And I was on a call yesterday, just as an aside, I am on the executive committee of the World Jewish Congress, and I chair the security committee for communities around the globe. We had a meeting yesterday, and as much as it's cold comfort, there is a global trend. And I have pages of reports of what's happening in communities across the globe. And interestingly, Germany being one of the most awful environments at the moment. For example, synagogues being, Israeli flags being burnt in front of Jewish communities in Bonn and in Munster, stones thrown at the door of the synagogue in Bonn and it was vandalized. Palestinian protesters burned the flag of Israel near Stamford Bridge in London. New York Assemblywoman posted a map inspired by the Hamas slogan, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And in Spain, so across the global Jewish world, we are all in this together. And one of the points that I keep making is that as Jews and as the Jewish community globally, this is the time we have to stick together. We have to be united in our protest of Jews being targeted because of a conflict in a really tragic situation in the Middle East. So we have to also, as a South African Jewish Board of Deputies, be strategic in how we respond. We have to have a social media presence so that our community doesn't feel unprotected or alone, but we can't let that be at the hands of every person in our community, because unfortunately, the comments, so somebody will post, Hitler is great, and there are ghastly images. I saw one this morning, which says virus, and the picture of the virus, next to the virus is the Israeli flag, and then vaccine, and the picture is of Hitler. That's the kind of images that our community is being confronted, and young people, school kids, are being confronted with every single day. We have to make sure that we, as a South African Jewish Board of Deputies, respond to these in a responsible way that doesn't create all-out media war. But a lot of comments then come. So somebody will post this on their Facebook post, and then you'll get supportive comments, but in the main, vicious support for those ugly images that I've begun to describe to you. We've been through this before, as I said, and we've learned the lessons, and we're resilient, and we'll learn new lessons from this round. But as we know, it will pass, and please God, situation in Israel, there's talk of a ceasefire tomorrow. Please God, by next week, things will have calmed down, and we'll begin to rebuild, as the Israelis will have to rebuild with their own neighbors. But the real tragedy in the Middle East is that people are dying, and we need to, as a South African community, but as the South African Jewish community, keep being a voice for peace and coexistence. I think I'm going to stop there because I feel like I've been talking for a long time. I wonder if you have any questions about the work that the board does in general. We're involved actively every single day in making sure, I just maybe give you a couple of points of what we do when we're not engaged in this kind of round-the-clock response to a conflict. We're involved in making sure that Jewish students who are observant are able to write their exams when they're posted on Shabbat, at other times, or on Chagim, and that takes a lot of time and effort, because there are obviously a number of universities, and we're constantly making sure that the religious freedoms of our community are upheld. We're involved in the repatriation of bodies in order for people to have a dignified and speedy burial when people pass away overseas. And recently we had an instance of a person died in China, and that requires our relationships with the Department of Health, with the Department of International Relations, to make sure that we're able to support families in their time of need. We're involved with a host of dealing with anti-Semitism from the right wing. We're in court at the moment with one Mr. Lamprecht, who's spewed vicious hatred against our community in Gauteng. We are involved with fighting BDS at every level. So we're kept busy, but as I said, I think I'm going to give you a chance to maybe ask any questions if you have any, or any other questions related to life in our community that you think I might be able to answer. I'll try. Diana?
So if you'd like to ask any questions, please unmute yourself, and you can use the hand, which shows you at the bottom of the screen. Anybody want to start off by asking questions? Don't be shy.
Definitely don't be shy. Maybe I'll ask you, are any of you aware of any of the issues that I've been talking about? Have any of you been seen anything in the press? Because that's another aspect of the work that we do. We are dependent on our community to feed us with incidents and any of these anti-Semitic rhetoric that I've referred you to, most of it comes to us from members of our community. So I'm encouraging you, if you are exposed in through the media or see anything on television or want us to be aware of anything, I do want you to know that we are the organization that, and you could channel your comments or alert us through Diana, through the Cape Jewish Seniors as well, because we can't be everywhere, and our eyes and ears are you, our community. Anybody?
Lena, do you want to say something?
Yes, I want to say something. I look forward to hearing your response to Cyril Ramaphosa's letter and giving him the true facts, which he doesn't have at the moment. So we look forward to hearing about that.
I'll send the
Thank
letter,
you.
which we're busy drafting, and I'll send it to
No.
Diana. She can circulate it to you. We're in the process of drafting it. Lena, let me just say this. We've tried to respond to him in a slightly different way, because it's very difficult when the president writes about his own personal experience in apartheid. You can't challenge somebody and say, what you experienced then is not what's happening. We can't speak for what he endured or his personal feelings. But what we can challenge is when he says that in any conflict, you need to have compromise, you need to have negotiation. Well, that's what we want to challenge. Where was your empathy? He used the word empathy in his letter. Where is your empathy for the suffering of the murderous intention of 4,000 rockets that are falling onto Israel? So that's what we want to challenge. The fact that he speaks about empathy, he speaks about compromise, and where is South Africa in playing a role? South Africa has played a role in so many conflicts on our continent. This is the perfect opportunity for South Africa to play a role in bringing the two parties together. But you can't have the confidence of the Israelis if you only see them as being at fault. So that's the route that we're going, Lena, in terms of responding to him. But I think what I'll do, for those of you who are interested, I can circulate our statements and our responses, and Diana can share them with your group if you would be interested.
Certainly, that would be useful. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else with questions?
Can you hear me, David?
David, please. Yes.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, David.
Thanks for all the tremendous work that you're doing. Was it last night or the night before? I tried to phone into Cape Talk, the very late session, Radio 702, Aubrey Masanga.
Yes.
And he's going on that Israel's an apartheid state, carrying on a settler, colonial. And I came in and he gave me about a sentence or two, and then he cut me off. And I said, look, and I had in front of me Benjamin Pogren's book, Drawing Fire, where he shows chapter and verse why it's not an apartheid state. But he said, yes, you've got your, I don't think he'd actually heard of it. He said, no, you've got your, you side with that book, and I'm really not interested in that. And we were amazed, he kind of cut me off. And then he's carrying on, and he carried on last night. And it's, I don't know if more people should try to phone in, or I don't know what you can do with Cape Talk 702. I really don't know.
So, David, that was the one of the big discussions. We meet every morning on Zoom to discuss the challenges of the previous 24 hours. And this is where we've been really, we had a problem with eyewitness news, which we seem to have ironed out. But most of the news media have been very partisan. But Cape Talk 702, we're now considering a challenge to them. We're not sure. Whether it should be a public challenge saying you hold yourself up as a space for dialogue and a talk space, but you don't give anybody. And I'll make your point about how a member of our community was cut off in the middle of his, when you called. I'll add that to our list of, because that's exactly what we're doing. We're considering the ombudsman, and I think that's probably one of the options that we will go with, because we've every person that we have proposed, we've written to them and said we would like to have X and Y come on and speak And they, as I said, there was supposed to be somebody today and they cancelled. And they said, oh, maybe on Monday. Well, we know Monday is 3 days after the ceasefire, and there's going to be, they'll come up with, no, there's breaking news or there's something unrelated that's much more important at that point. So I appreciate your frustration and thank you for bringing it to my attention, but we are in the midst of dealing with them and feel aggrieved on behalf of our community at the way that they're treating us.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you.
Diana, sorry to interrupt. We've got a comment from Sunny Meyerson, who lives at Highlands House. Can I just let him propose the
Absolutely.
comment?
Yeah, sure. Hello, Sunny. Welcome.
Yeah, you too.
Hi, good morning. It's not a question.
Sunny, you can just stand back a bit so they can see you. Yeah, that's fine.
It's something
That's fine. We
bothered-
can see you.
it's something that's bothered me for a long time. We're on the back foot all the time. We're fighting a battle that we cannot win because we've lost the narrative. What are we going to do? We've got so many brains amongst our people. What are we going to do about taking control of the narrative? Because that is the only way that we are going to win. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Sunny, it's an excellent point, and it's something that we grapple with always, but particularly in South Africa, where the analogy around apartheid has resonates so deeply. You just have to mention to anybody on the street that Israel is doing what the whites did to you in this country, and you've got a groundswell of support. So for many people, there is very little understanding of the real complexities on the ground. And they are just swept up with the emotion of what they're fed. And the narrative, one of the projects that we've been doing that has had a measure of success has been taking trips of journalists to Israel. So every year we take a group of journalists. Sadly, we haven't been able to do it. The last one was in November 2019 because of COVID, but we take journalist trips to Israel, not to show them a rose-tinted version or we show them the good, the bad, and the ugly, and give them a sense of being able to respond to in the media in South Africa in a way that is even-handed and with a real sense of having been there. Because most of the emotive response and the narrative that you so correctly describe, Sunny, is based on propaganda. But it's an easy story to spin. You talk about oppressed people living under occupation. I mean, we could do a wonderful job of spinning their story. We all understand that it's not always, the story is not always shared accurately. And the complexities of the situation that are deep and very troubling have to be resolved by the people who live there and their leadership. And there is suffering on both sides, and their leadership has to take responsibility for that and come to the table to negotiate an outcome that will change the narrative for everyone. But in the meantime, we are absolutely on the back foot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I talk? Okay.
Yes, sure.
Thank you for that. I had a couple of ideas going back some years where I felt that we could take control of the narrative. I tried to approach various, well, the Zionist Federation in particular, and I never got to first base. My idea was very simple. We should have an exhibition at one of the black schools in the township, and we should bus in as many of black children as we can and show them what Israel does, not only for Africa, but for the world. We have to spin a positive narrative for the young black people in this country. We should have a competition where they must write an essay, and the top 3, 4, 5 who we judge as the best should be given a trip to Israel. These people will come back and they will start changing the narrative.
I do agree that as many people who can get there and as many trips as we can sponsor And as many people, that's what birthright in the US has been, admittedly for young Jewish people. But the more people who are exposed to the reality, I agree with you, Sonny.
Well, I don't know.
Your ideas are excellent. And it's not something that isn't considered. We are, when you say take an exhibition into an environment to share a little bit about what Israel does, it's not always so easy in that the reception is not what you would want. I'll just give you a tiny example. At the height of the HIV pandemic, where Israel had cutting edge medical opportunities to support people in preventing HIV. We at the board went through a process of taking and this was going to be entirely funded. They were going to set up a factory. Israelis were going to set up a factory in South Africa that would produce a clip that would aid in male circumcision, which has got a huge impact on the prevention of HIV infection spread. And the unions, business, everybody was ready. The government was ready for this factory to be established in South Africa. The trade unions, COSATU, said we'd rather die of AIDS. We don't want anything that comes from Israel.
Yeah, but Mary, you're missing my point.
Oh, sorry.
My point is we have to influence the young people. And I lived in Israel, and I lived through the era where Germany and Israel were reconciling. And how did they do it? They started off with little children. They started sending young Israeli kids to Germany and bringing young German students to Israel. My wife and I were involved in this very scheme, okay? It became phenomenally successful to such an extent that by the mid-1970s, there were more German tourists in Israel than from any other country in the world. We have to start with the children. Forget about COSATU and the older people. That's a generation we've lost. And that's what Ben Gurion said to Adenauer. We'll start with the children because we've got a generation here who will never talk to you. And that's how we have to overcome it. We have to start with the children. Forget about the adults.
No, you're right. That's a good point.
Anybody else wanting to add anything or ask Mary questions?
Mary.
David.
Mary again. I just wanted to know what's been disappointing has been the lack of support seemingly from the Christian churches. Is there anything going on there? Or I know from what I've read, the Anglican Church has been quite vociferously anti-Israel for a long time. Yeah. We have is it the Dean, Michael Weeder, they call him Father Gaza, who's been operating here for years, and he and his wife, who used to work at the District 6 Museum, Benita Bennett, have been really at the forefront, and it's very disappointing that there doesn't seem to be any Christian community support for Israel that I can discern. Maybe you're aware of it. One reads of the Methodists supporting BDS, one reads of this and that. Is there no one out there?
There is a South African Friends of Israel that is largely the Christian community, mostly the evangelical churches. That you're absolutely right about the Anglicans. I've been working closely with an Anglican priest in Durban, who's in fact just left his parish. He remains a priest, but he's no longer going to be, because he's going to be taking over from John Atkinson in the Western Cape, who is, the person who's involved with Jewish-Christian relations. And Peter Houston, who's a pastor, is very influential in working at grassroots level. His view is that the way to erode this support for BDS, in fact, in the Anglican Church is at grassroots level building up, because it's pretty similar to what Sunny was saying, is that there is a hardened core of senior at the synod that are very supportive of BDS, but there is definitely work being done, and we have had an outpouring of support, but not as public as we have usually had in times of conflict. We have had direct to us, but I agree with you, there's not been as much in the media, and I wonder if their attempts to have their voices heard in the media have been thwarted, as we were earlier discussing. But they are one of the parties that we are working with in terms of this counter pro-Israel rally in Glen Hazel on Sunday. Is the Christian community. They've come out and very much in support of wanting to, we just debating the merits of the security of it. But they are very much at the forefront of that support.
Good to hear, good to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
What reaction has taken place after the cavalcade in Britain, in London?
So four people have been arrested. So immediately afterwards, it went on social media. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson came out in a condemnation, I must say, in very specific condemnation, referred to it being on the eve of Shavuot, how terrible, won't tolerate it, etc. So it was unequivocal. And interestingly, the CST, which is the Community Security Trust, our CSO, but they work very closely with law enforcement in the UK. They announced that 4 people have been arrested. So I don't know the follow-up as to whether they've been charged, but they managed to have their identities. They had number plate recognition. So they were certainly on top of it. Unfortunately, as much as it's dealt with, it doesn't stop it. And it's bubbling under the surface all the time, which is what we have to deal with.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lena.
Anyone else wanting to chat?
It was great questions. Thank you. It was really good.
Mary, we do have a bit of time left over. Is there anything else apart from what you've chatted this morning that you'd like to tell us about, or what else you do, or how involved we could be, or what we could do to assist?
So I think keeping informed is what's really helpful, and that's why I said that I'll circulate. I'll make sure that we add you, Diana, to our mailing list of making sure that you'll receive all our statements and our letters and so on, so that you can share those. Because when you come into contact with people, the opportunity to share and make the point that the role of the Jewish community in this country is to encourage coexistence and peace. We're not here to fuel the flames of a conflict far away. I think that's the overwhelming message. And to import that conflict onto our streets is what we consider to be the tragedy at the moment. Is that these protests, because the school that I was telling you about, these kids have been friends. Some of them have been in school together for 5, 6, 10 years. And suddenly, how are they going to go back to school in a week or two and resume those relationships? The damage for all of us. And Sunny was talking about the impact on children and how we can influence children. This is the time not to fuel these divisions, because these children are learning with their vicious attitude at home, sadly, and coming to school. And it's, how do we rebuild after that? So I think for us, it's about always encouraging people to think critically and not to be blinded to the fact that this is a conflict with enormous tragedy for both sides. The work of the board, as I said, is fascinating. We're involved in so many other aspects of our communal life, whether it's mainly fighting anti-Semitism, sadly in the courts. I'm sure many of you have been aware of the frustration and the challenge we've had against the Judicial Services Commission with regard to the interviews of prospective judges recently. And one particular series of interviews that were for judges who had made application to join the Constitutional Court and were challenged around their religious observance, Jewish candidates. So we involved with challenging the Judicial Services Commission on why that line of questioning. Why are Jewish judges challenged to understand how they feel about Israel-Palestine, whether they are Shabbat observant, how will that impact on their work, when no other faith groups are challenged to the same question around Israel-Palestine or the impact of their religious observance on the possibility of their work. So it's never a dull moment, but I don't know if any of you were aware of those interviews that took place recently, and we've written to the acting Chief Justice, we've written again to the President, we've met with some of the President's assistant to bring our unhappiness to their attention. Yeah, it's a constant battle, but there are some wonderful outcomes. So I'll just close with one story that I'd like to tell you about a young man in 2015. He was the chairman of the SRC at Wits University. His name is Msibo Dlamini, and you possibly remember, they were at the time of Fees Must Fall, that very the riots and the protests around Fees Must Fall. He made a speech at Wits University about how he loved Hitler and how Hitler was this wonderful leader, etc. And it was we brought a case against him, and we've been pursuing this case all these years with the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission said they couldn't find him, that he'd gone to Swaziland, and we just never let up. And about a year ago, we started to get overtures from Msibo Dlamini to say that he's reflected on what he said and he'd like to meet with us. He is genuinely remorseful. He was convicted in the Fees Must Fall case that Wits took against 11 students. And he did spend a few nights in prison. But much more recently, we had discussions with him. We spent time with him. He spent time at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, exposing him to the insensitivity of his awful remarks and the impact on our community through spending a good deal of time at the Holocaust and Genocide Center in Johannesburg. And he then wrote us what we consider to be a genuine apology. We seldom have seen somebody so deeply remorseful. I think what happened with Msibo is that he was attempting to pursue a political career. And he started to understand that these charges that we'd brought against him for his vicious anti-Semitic outrage were working against him. And that actually his opportunity for stardom in the political arena had been thwarted because of these utterances. And he basically said that he realized that he better start to think about them and reflect on them because it hadn't done him any good. And I think for us at the board, we went through this process. We far preferred to work with people in a form of restorative justice than punitive justice, because to punish somebody isn't going to change their views. But Msibo Dlamini is now working at Wits to make sure that we in fact have a Jewish young woman who's the vice chair of the SRC, and mostly through the lobbying of people like Msibo Dlamini and his friends. So there are cases where we've had amazing success of restorative justice, where people have come to understand that they don't want to be that person that they were, and also that being an anti-Semite in South Africa doesn't bring you friends and bring you kudos in the political arena. The difficulty for us in South Africa in particular is the issue around anti-Israel, is that there is, and we all agree, the freedom to practice your religion and to live a full Jewish life in South Africa is absolutely wonderful. You can walk without fear, wearing a kippah. Currently, my colleagues in Montreal are saying they've been advising their community to take their mezuzot off their doors. Today, absolutely today. They've been trying to telling their community, take your mezuzot off the doors because of the hatred on the streets at this moment. We don't live like that. People, if you're walking home from shul with a kippah on your head, people walk past and say shalom. The problem is if you're walking with an Israeli flag, that's the challenge. And how do we make sure that people understand that as an ardently Zionist community, we, the spewings on social media all around, we must be careful, Jews are nice, it's the Zionists we don't like. There needs to be a clear understanding that there's no daylight between a Jew and a Zionist in the main in South Africa. Yes, some Jews are lesser or more Zionistic, some are not necessarily Zionistic, but the majority of our community, based on the Kaplan surveys, is that we're an ardently Zionist community. And hatred towards Israel is very, very hurtful for us.
Thank you. We have a question from Hermoine, and she's asking, how do you control vicious cartoonists like Zapira?
So that's a challenge we've lived with for years. He, in this country, we have to celebrate the fact that freedom of speech is very much a part of our discourse, but one of our main thrusts of our work is making sure that that freedom is not unlimited. So we cannot allow freedom to be, particularly with the tragic past that we've had in this country, we cannot allow freedom of speech to be completely and utterly without any checks and balances. And sometimes the Zapira does cross the line and it is incredibly hurtful, and we challenge it where we can. But I don't know who asked the question, but we haven't been very successful in making sure that our community and the aspects of our community that we love are protected when it comes to Zapira. He is, I think the word vicious was used. And some of his cartoons have, when they cross the line into what we consider to be hate speech, we have challenged him. And we'll certainly keep you abreast of any, if you find any that you want us to be aware of, again, please, you are the eyes and ears of what we need to know is going on in our community.
Thank you. Well, Mary, it's been a pleasure having you with us this morning, and thank you so much for your time. I say one of the good things about lockdown and this COVID epidemic is that I know that I've contacted Mary on numerous occasions over the years saying, when will you be in Cape Town? We'd love to have you come to our centers to talk to our seniors, and it's never been possible. But now with COVID, I can get people from all over South Africa and anywhere in the world actually to talk to us on a Thursday morning. So it's been a pleasure having you, and I'm sure that everybody here has enjoyed your presentation. We know how passionate you are about what you do, and we thank you for what you and your team are doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It's been wonderful questions, and I'm so enjoyed having my time with you. Keep safe and stay well.
Hopefully we'll entertain you in Cape Town sometime.
Hope so. Look forward to that. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Diana.
Thanks to everybody.
Bye-bye.
Don't forget this afternoon, we've got our concert at 2 o'clock. Harry Connick Jr. concert at Newport Jazz Festival. So please join us for a lovely interlude this afternoon. And then tomorrow, Yiddish with Rachel and Sybil and Veronica at 10 a.m. in the morning. Otherwise, everybody else, stay safe, stay warm, stay dry. And if you're not joining us for the next couple of days, we'll see you again on Monday. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.